السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ولي الصالحين، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah, in the middle of it, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وكذلك جعلناكم أمة وسطا لتكونوا شهداء على الناس ويكون الرسول عليكم شهيدا. This is in the middle of Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 143. We'll continue inshallah in the talk about what it means to be a moderate Muslim. The ayah I just read, I mentioned last week, is that Allah made us a moderate nation so that we be bearer of witness to other nations, to other people, so that the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam be bearer of witness to us in the day of judgment. And I explained last time that being a moderate, that's the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it in the Quran. This is the default setting of every Muslim who says La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Being moderate, it means to be just and be right, be good to everyone. And the first ones to be just to is obviously ourselves, our family. Of course, we have to observe the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be just to each other. So the questions I left last time, and we'll continue with it, are in this area, in the Greater Danbury, the Muslims of the Greater Danbury area. Are we just to each other? Are the Masajid just to each other? Are we really considered from among the successful communities because we consider ourselves moderate or just? We're not. But we call ourselves moderate because we are not fanatics. And that's our simple explanation of being moderate for ourselves. But it really means more than that. It means we really need to learn to change ourselves and help ourselves to change, to be better with each other, to be just with each other, so that eventually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will change our situation here in the Greater Danbury areas for the Muslims to be in much better situation than they are right now. But also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains in the Quran that being just or being moderate for a Muslim, He explains it in other aspects as the combination of the Islamic Sharia and life sciences, different than other religions. Islam establishes its noble experiment. Islam appreciates the vitality of science, unlike other religions, in building the state and building the society and the community. In this regard, Islam praises science and scientists in various fields. These fields include every understanding that help humans accomplish their mission in life. They help humans how to reconstruct life and reconstruct earth and taken advantage of its wealth and treasure. And we take that from the Quran. There are many verses in the Quran that explains that, and one of the main verses that our scholars use is in Surah Al-Ankabut, verse 20. قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ بَدَأَ الْخَلْقِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, tell your people, tell your nation, the nation of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we are part of the nation of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam until the day of judgment. There will be followers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Tell them to travel the earth, travel the universe, and see how creation was originated. So Allah is telling us directly in the Quran to go and discover how creation was originated, that He left us landmarks for us to research and discover, for us to challenge ourselves and think. He doesn't want us to stay home. He doesn't want us just to be ignorant and illiterate. And notice over here when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam tell your nation, his nation is not only consist of man. His nation consists of men and women. So when he's talking about education, when Allah is alluding to education, he's talking about education for both men and women. To the degree some of our scholars, when they were investigating the women scientists in Islam, whether scientists and scholars in religion or life sciences, they were able to find volumes of women scholars, even exist until now in the British archives, until up to the 18th century. To the degree, and I mentioned it many times, that medieval European women and Asians women were very jealous of Muslim women, how much freedom they used to have. Of course, freedom within the boundary of halal and haram. If we practice Islam the way we're supposed to practice it, away from our backward cultures, women have a lot of freedom. And our history proves that. Our volumes of how many scientists we had prove that. What did we do to women afterward? We kept them at home. Some mufti or muftis in the 18th century came up like, no, you gotta need to keep women at home, don't educate them, let them be illiterate. This is one of the first steps of how Islamic civilization went down, by uneducating women, by making women stay illiterate. Today, the number one illiterate women in the world are the Muslim women. The number one illiterate nation in general in the world, the nation of Muhammad, Ummat Iqra. The nation of read, does not read. How is that possible when Allah Himself telling you, you are among the moderate nations of the world? We made you moderate because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us how to secure the combination of Sharia and life sciences for both men and women. Right? But we neglected it and we left it aside. And one thing happened to my generation as we were growing up. They were emphasizing, and this is the problem. You go and ask any Christian, observant Christian or Jew, how old is Earth? They'll tell you, or the universe, they'll tell you 6,000 years. And this is based on their biblical or the Torah. And of course, that negates every scientific view. You go and ask a Muslim scholar or those who read and discover the scientific miracles of the Quran, how old is Earth? They'll tell you from the numerical and scientific miracles of the Quran, it's 4.5 billion years. So we know right away that there is no negation between science and religion in the Quran. The Quran encourages science and wants us to go into science and discover and be strong and be among the leaders of the world. And that is how we were up until the 20th century, because we are the first one to lay the ground for the foundation for basic science, from algorithms, from biology, from the medicine, from geology, from every aspect of science. The Muslims are the ones who put the foundation for it, right? And what happened later on? We neglected it, and we neglected the education for women. And then later on, like when my generation was being raised, they made it sound like separate science from religion and politics. Put religion and politics in the back of your head. If you pray, it's good for you, pray. If you read the Quran, good for you every now and then to pray, but focus on science and education. Exactly the same way the Christians and the Jews did to their people, because back in medieval Europe, they even used to execute people who went into science. So the Muslims did the same thing the Christians and the Jews did. So separate, they made it sound like science and education is in total negation or opposite of religion, which is absolutely not true. And why did they do that? They did that because we have tyrants, especially in the Arab world, right? And and they want you to stay away from religion and politics. As long as you stay away from religion and politics, and you are only spending time in education, you don't look over what they do and you don't ask them anything, right? And the parents, because they saw the abuse and the tyranny of these tyrants, they go and emphasize that forget about religion and politics, just focus on education. And this is what happened in my generation, not only where I was raised, even any spot in the Arab countries, you ask the people, did your parents teach you to put the prayers or religion in the back of your head and the Quran and just focus on education? They'll tell you, yeah. And this is because of tyrants. They wanted to separate, they wanted to do the same thing the Christians and the Jews did, separate education or science from religion and politics. And that did not make us moderate nations. You even look over here when they call some of the Arab countries as moderate Sunni Arab countries. Why are they moderate Sunni Arab countries? They are moderate Sunni Arab countries because they drink, they brew their own liquor, they are willing to bring the foreign invader to their countries, they're willing to bow to the invaders. This is their definition of moderation. What's so moderate about that? There is nothing moderate about that. This is like being mischievous. This is not the definition of being moderate. So we need to understand not to follow their definition or of the tyrants or the non-Muslim of their definition of moderation. Our definition of moderation, according to the Quran, protecting keeping a balance between observing the rights of Allah and observing the rights of the creation of Allah, including the environment and animals and everything else that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. Also, when it comes to moderation, Islam did not ask a Muslim to be a monk in a monastery or a worshipper that stays in the corner of the mosque all day long. Islam, the Muslim are moderate group because an issue of worship, because they do not exceed the limits and the boundaries that were legislated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. They are followers, they are not innovators. One time, and I think I mentioned this story many times, Rasulullah found one of the companions in the masjid all the time. He knows he's married, he knows he has kids. And he tells him, why are you doing this? Rasul is asking the companion, and he's like, I want to be close to Allah, I want to guarantee heaven for me, for myself, by praying as much as he can, by spending as much time possible in the masjid as he can. He goes, Rasul asked him, who spends money on you and your family? And he said, somebody from his family, his relative, his cousin. He said, well, your cousin is better than you. You follow what I'm saying? Let's not forget, I always remind ourselves that half of the list of the 10 promised heaven were the millionaires of that time. So they were busy in their businesses, but they did not leave, they did not forget about the rights of Allah and their service and their duties toward the community. They were able to balance it, and that's what we need to do. Yes, we cannot forget about our worship and our Allah's right, but we cannot be too much fanatic to the degree that we forget about the rights of our family on us and our rights. Another story comes to mind is the story of the companions, may Allah be pleased with them, Salman al-Farisi and Abu Darda. So Salman al-Farisi one time was a guest to Abu Darda, and Abu Darda, both of them actually were known to be very modest, very down-to-earth people, very not extravagant and do not like the pleasures of life. But at least Salman al-Farisi was a little bit more moderate than Abu Darda. So he goes to him, he's always fasting. He's always up all night praying, Abu Darda that is. He's not taking care of his wife. His wife is always looking pale and wearing raggedy clothes. So when he wanted to wake up at night, Salman al-Farisi told him, no, you go back to sleep. When he went to his house for dinner, he said, I can't eat with you because I'm fasting. He said, you gotta break your fast. It's not a mandatory fasting. Why are you fasting? Forget you. You're gonna break your fast, you're gonna eat with me. And he made him break his fast. So, and then they went to the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, and Salman al-Farisi said what he saw, explained to Rasul what he saw. Abu Darda explained what he was trying to do. His intention is to get closer to Allah by doing these things. And Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam explained it. We are moderate people. We don't do that. We observe the rights of Allah, but we observe also the rights of our body and the rights of our family. Salman al-Farisi is the one who's right. So Rasul attested to the wisdom of Salman al-Farisi. Moderate Muslims are not a group that does not over-exaggerate. We do not over-exaggerate of the love of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, or the household of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, or the companions, like the nations before us did. Like, you know, the Christians, they worship Isa alayhi salam. They worship his mother. They worship their priests. The same thing the Jews, when they and the nations before us, or the Hindus or the Buddhists, they worship their righteous people. We are supposed to love our Prophet. He's second after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all other, we're supposed to love all other prophets and the household of Rasul and the companions, but we do not exaggerate in loving them to the degree we worship them. Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam would refuse for us to do that. And we would refrain, for us as moderate people, we would refrain to discuss the controversial issues that happen during the time of our Sahabi. May Allah be pleased with them. And we know, especially during the Khalifa Uthman, Al-Khalifa Ali, that there were disputes during that time, and a lot of problems happened. These things happen. These are the dark pages of our history. We don't need to talk about it or have argument about it or controversy about it. We just leave it away. So this is the saved group that I mentioned last time, or Al-Firqa Al-Najiyah. That faith, you know, like I said last time, you will find a lot of people tell you when we try to give advice to one of the Muslim brothers that you saw doing something wrong, and you take them on the side and they will yell at you. And I'm sure it happened to some of you. They would yell at you like, "Oh, I have more faith than you." Well, faith for a moderate person, yes, it's what resides in the heart, but it's in accordance to what's on the tongue, and it's accordance to our action and how we live our life. So we are not contradicting what's in our hearts. The moderate group and just group concerning the issues of divine decree and predestination, al-qada wal-qadar. And I know I went into great details in al-qada wal-qadar, that we do have a free will, a limited free will, but we are under the universal will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Quran in Surah Al-Takwir, وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ. And you cannot will unless that's what Allah wills. So with Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, and I mentioned this hadith before, but it's good to remind each other with that hadith. Act for each one will be facilitated to enact in accordance to what had been decreed for him or her. Now the problem with the Muslim Ummah, and this is common a lot today, and this is common among those who are into mystical Islam. There is only one version of Islam, but some people like to divide it into different versions, and they call it mystical Islam. That they refuse to discuss the free will of a human being. That every situation that we are in right now is because of the will of Allah. It has nothing to do with our mistakes. To the degree, even if your country is occupied, like Palestine is occupied, or Syria is occupied, or Iraq is occupied, and try to fight to free these countries, they tell you, no, that's going against the will of Allah. This is their own thinking, that Allah willed it to be that way, and if you try to resist the occupation, you are resisting the will of Allah or the Qadr. That's not being moderate, that's not being just. That's not the explanation of al-Qada wal-Qadr, all right? Or like the situations of the Muslims here in the greater Danbury area. We go and blame it or throw it on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and exonerate ourselves that we made mistakes. No, it's not because of Allah. Allah does not want wrong to the situation of the Muslim. Allah wants the Muslims to be victorious, and He explains that in the Quran, and He explains in the Quran that the Muslims will always be victorious, and the reason for it, because they are a just nation. We are a moderate nation. So why we are not, our situation erased the way it is in the Greater Danbury area? Because of mistakes we've done. Has nothing to do with the will of Allah. But if we clear our intentions, and we try to be just with each other, and we try to be truly moderate Muslims, the way Allah describes in the Quran and Rasul explains in the Sunnah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will facilitate us Muslims in the Greater Danbury area to be victorious and to be successful 3 masajid in the Greater Danbury area. And one last thing of being moderate, we are moderate group in the issue of what is lawful and what is unlawful, and how judgments are made. This is in accordance to Surah At-Tawbah, when Allah says, اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله. They took their rabbis and their monks to be lords beside Allah. This is in Surah At-Tawbah, verse 31. This is when Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, this ayah came down, when it came down, describing how the Christians follow blindly their priests and their popes, or the Jews follow blindly the rabbis, to the degree if they tell them to do something unlawful, they would do it, even though it's unlawful, because the rabbi said it, or the priest said it. All right? And the same thing with us now happening. You get, like, for example, in Iraq or in Syria, and other places in the Muslim countries, when muftis give decisions that it's okay to rape women in these countries. Why is it okay? They are Muslim countries, and the ones who are doing it, Muslims doing it are Muslim, because they are not obeying the Sultan or the president. And the same thing, the terrorist group do the same thing. So that's why I always say there is no difference between these terrorist groups and the tyrants, because they do decrees that are unlawful against the teaching of the Quran and the Sunnah, and people following it blindly. Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam says, when you follow someone blindly like that, you are his worshipper or her worshipper. Okay? We do not follow anybody blindly. When something is haram, it's haram. We don't follow it. Right? But unfortunately, even though they do it, they still be called like this mufti who gave the decision. It's okay to corrupt this journalist in a consulate. It's okay. It's nothing wrong with it, because he went against the Sultan. Well, if you go against the Sultan, you corrupt your opponent like that, and you consider that halal. So these people are considered worshippers. Worshippers not of Allah, worshippers of another human being, because they are following someone who ordered them to do something haram, and they following it, and it's haram. You're not supposed to do that. Moderate Muslims do not do that, yet they still call them moderate Muslims, and there is nothing moderate about them. The story that comes to mind for this is the story of Uday ibn Hatim, may Allah be pleased with him. He used to be Christian before he became Muslim. When this ayah that I just read from Surah At-Tawbah came down, he said to Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, we did not worship them, saying we did not worship the priest. So Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, did they not make lawful whatever Allah made unlawful, and you obeyed them? And did they not make lawful whatever Allah Almighty made unlawful, and you followed them? So Uday ibn Hatim replied, yes. And then Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam said, this is how you worship them. So if you follow a mufti or a sultan or a president who you know this is like tells you drinking a little bit is halal, for example, or following a tyrant ruler is okay, you know this is haram. You know from the Quran and the Sunnah this is haram. If you follow that decree, if you follow that decision, you are his worshipper. You're not supposed to do that. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. Ask Allah for forgiveness. He's the most forgiving, the most merciful.